Korean Air Flight 801, 1997. The tragic story of Korean Air Flight 801 is one of miscommunication, fatigue, and a fatal chain of errors that led to one of the deadliest crashes in U.S. territory. On August 6, 1997, the Boeing 747-300, carrying 254 passengers and crew, slammed into Bija Peak in Guam just 3.5 miles short of the runway. Only 25 people survived the inferno that followed. The flight had been routine until the final approach. Heavy rain and low visibility forced the crew to rely on instruments, but the glide slope system, a critical landing aid, was out of service. Captain Park Young-chul, an experienced pilot with nearly 9,000 flight hours, mistakenly believed it was active. Despite warnings from his first officer and flight engineer, he continued the steep descent. 6 seconds before impact, the first officer urged a go-around, but it was too late. The plane struck the hillside at 660 feet, erupting into flames. Rescue efforts were delayed by rugged terrain, a blocked fuel pipeline, and confusion over jurisdiction. The crash site was on U.S. Navy land. Among the survivors was 11-year-old Rika Matsuda, who escaped after her mother, trapped under debris, begged her to leave. Another survivor, Barry Small, later campaigned for safer seat designs after his leg was shattered by a crossbar during the crash. The NTSB investigation revealed a chilling breakdown in cockpit hierarchy. Korean Air's culture discouraged junior crew from challenging captains, even when disaster loomed. Fatigue also played a role. Park had been reassigned to the flight last minute, cutting into his rest. The FAA shared blame. A safety system designed to warn of low altitude had been deliberately muted to reduce false alarms. In the aftermath, Korean Air paid $70 million in settlements and suspended Guam flights for 4 years. The crash spurred reforms, including a U.S. law requiring foreign airlines to have disaster response plans. Pan Am Flight 806, 1974. A Boeing 707 nicknamed Clipper Radiant was just minutes from landing in American Samoa. What should have been a routine descent into Pago Pago International Airport turned into a fireball of chaos. The crew had flown in from Oakland and were heading to Los Angeles with stops in Pago Pago and Honolulu. The weather, nasty. Rain showers, gusts up to 25 miles per hour. And worst of all, a silent killer known as wind shear, microburst level. The flight crew was seasoned. Captain Leroy Peterson had 17,414 hours in the cockpit. The rest of the crew was just as experienced. But that night, experience wasn't enough. At 11:40 p.m., they were lined up using the ILS for runway 5, but the descent rate picked up dangerously. The co-pilot warned, "You're a little high." Moments later, "You're at minimums." Then, field in sight. And right after that, silence. The jet slammed into trees nearly 4,000 feet short of the runway, ripped through dense vegetation, hit a 3-foot-high stone wall, and caught fire. All 4 engines were torn off. Shockingly, everyone survived the initial impact. The cabin intact. Survivors later said it felt like a rough landing until fire tore through the fuselage. By the time rescuers arrived, 97 people were gone. Only 4 survived, and one of them, Third Officer James Phillips, who had been filling in due to the actual co-pilot's laryngitis, made it out, only to succumb to his injuries days later. The NTSB blamed delayed reactions, poor visibility, and a so-called black hole approach that distorted perception. The cost: 97 lives, countless grieving families, and a grim lesson in how fast invisible wind can shatter steel and bone, and how even the most experienced hands can be caught off guard by nature's silent ambush. World Airways Flight 830, 1960. It was just after 6 o'clock in the morning on September 19, 1960, when a World Airways DC-6 lifted off from Guam's Naval Air Station Agana, carrying 94 souls, American service members and their families, on a trip that was supposed to be routine. The aircraft, once a freighter for American Airlines before being repurposed by World Airways, had seen over 12,700 flight hours. The captain, Rudy Holman, was a seasoned pilot with more than 15,000 hours in the sky. His crew, equally competent, had thousands of combined hours. But none of that would stop what happened next. Less than a minute into the flight, the plane made a right turn far too soon, before reaching the safe climb altitude of 1,000 feet. That single fatal mistake sent the aircraft slamming into Mount Barragata. It tore through thick underbrush for about 1,000 feet before coming to a horrifying stop. A blaze erupted inside, killing 80 of the 94 people on board, including nearly all the crew. Only 14 survived. Most of the victims weren't killed by the crash itself, but by the fire that followed, trapped inside a metal tomb just seconds from safety. The Civil Aeronautics Board later ruled the crash as a clear case of pilot error. A deviation from the departure procedure cost dozens of lives. And what stings most? It was preventable. One wrong turn, literally, changed everything. Back then, that aircraft might have cost around $1 million, but no price tag can measure the loss this tragedy left behind. For Guam, it was the deadliest crash until 1997. And for many American families, it was a devastating reminder that even the safest seeming flights can turn catastrophic in less than a minute. Pan Am Flight 816, 1973. Pan Am Flight 816 was supposed to be a routine trip from New Zealand to San Francisco with a scenic stop in Tahiti. But on the night of July 22, 1973, everything unraveled in less than 30 seconds. The Boeing 707, a reliable workhorse named Clipper Winged Racer, took off from Faa'a International Airport at exactly 10:06 p.m. and then vanished into the Pacific. Of the 79 people on board, only one survived, James Campbell, a Canadian passenger who somehow woke up floating in the ocean. This wasn't a rookie crew. The captain, Robert Evarts, had over 25,000 flight hours. His team was stacked with experience. These guys had thousands of hours logged in the exact same aircraft, but even that couldn't save them. Earlier, a crack was discovered in the cockpit windshield. Technically minor, but cautious pilots still called New York headquarters. The response? Fly on. Just to be safe, they loaded an extra 35,000 pounds of fuel, pushing the plane's total weight past 315,000 pounds. That kind of bulk changes how you take off and how you survive if anything goes wrong. Minutes before departure, they requested a different runway and a lower cruising altitude. Odd moves, but not unheard of. Then, radio silence. Witnesses saw the plane make an abrupt 90-degree turn after takeoff, followed by a flash. The control tower heard a strange noise and saw lights hit the water. It was over in seconds. The black boxes sank to the ocean floor, 2,300 feet down, never recovered. No final words, no confirmed cause. The best guess? An instrument failure that left the pilots blind just as the aircraft climbed. Flight 816 became French Polynesia's deadliest crash, and one of aviation's most haunting cold cases. Air Manila Flight 702, 1976. On a humid June day in 1976, Air Manila Flight 702 took off from Guam's Naval Air Station Agana. 33 passengers and 12 crew packed into a Lockheed L-188A Electra, a bird that had already been flying for nearly 2 decades. The passengers, mostly military personnel. The plane, a second-hand model once owned by Eastern Airlines. And here's the kicker. One of its engines had a history of acting up, and the transponder, essential for communication, was listed as inoperable. Yes, inoperable. As the aircraft roared down the 10,015-foot runway, engine number 3's propeller suddenly feathered, meaning it shut itself down in flight. Instead of aborting takeoff like protocol dictated, Captain Roberto Havalera pushed on. It was a fatal gamble. They hadn't even reached rotation speed. The Electra clawed its way off the ground, flying no higher than 100 feet. For a moment, it stayed level. Then it dipped, hard. The crew, trying to climb, retracted the flaps too early. The plane couldn't handle the drag and weight imbalance with one engine gone. Seconds later, Flight 702 slammed into a hillside, tore through a fence, smashed into a car on the highway, and exploded in a burst of fire. All 45 souls aboard were lost, including the car's driver. 2 civilians nearby were severely burned. Among the dead was a 26-year-old flight attendant, Nalita Nair, who had once worked for Northwest Orient Airlines. The investigation revealed what maintenance logs had whispered all along. That engine had been a troublemaker, and multiple pilots had logged issues. But it was human error. A rushed decision to continue takeoff and premature flap retraction. That sealed everyone's fate. A preventable tragedy rooted in overconfidence and a cascade of mechanical red flags no one took seriously until it was too late. Polynesian Airlines Flight 208B, 1970. In the quiet early hours of January 13, 1970, tragedy struck just off the coast of Samoa. A Douglas DC-3D aircraft, Polynesian Airlines' one and only plane, took off from Faleolo International Airport at 2:54 a.m., beginning what should have been a short 80-mile hop to Pago Pago in American Samoa. On board were 32 people, 29 passengers, and 3 crew members. Most were from Western Samoa and New Zealand. It was supposed to be just another charter flight. Instead, it became one of the darkest moments in Pacific aviation history. Just a minute into the flight, things went horribly wrong. The aircraft hit a wall of turbulence, likely mixed with wind shear and heavy rain. Suddenly, the nose pitched up, too sharply. The plane stalled, and before the pilots could recover, the aircraft plunged into the sea only 400 yards from the end of the runway. Witnesses say there was an explosion. No one survived. This wasn't just a crash. It was a catastrophic loss for a national airline that only owned that single aircraft. Imagine an entire fleet disappearing in seconds. The aircraft, built in 1945 and powered by Pratt & Whitney engines, was destroyed beyond recovery. There were no survivors to interview, no black box to consult, only wreckage in the lagoon and 32 grieving families. What's particularly haunting is how fast it happened. From takeoff to impact, roughly 60 seconds. The official cause? An unrecoverable stall triggered by shifting winds. An invisible enemy that's nearly impossible to fight in an old propeller-driven plane like the DC-3. Back then, there was no global outcry, no social media storm, just a small island community waking up to silence and sorrow. For Polynesian Airlines, this wasn't just a crash, it was the end of an era. Canal Creek Air Crash, 1943. Picture this. A World War II-era Douglas C-47 Skytrain, a workhorse of the skies, embarking on a routine flight from Townsville to Brisbane, Australia, with a scheduled stop in Rockhampton. It was December 19, 1943, and aboard were 31 souls, 20 brave members of the United States Armed Forces, 8 equally courageous personnel from the Australian Defence Force, a war photographer capturing history in the making, a compassionate representative from the YMCA, and a dedicated adjutant from the Salvation Army. Little did they know, their journey would tragically end near a place called Canal Creek, about 31 miles north of Rockhampton. The whispers from that time suggest a sudden violent event, a fire erupting in one of the aircraft's engines, leading to a catastrophic explosion. The sturdy C-47, designed to endure the rigors of wartime transport, was ripped apart mid-air, disintegrating before it plummeted to the earth. In an instant, all 31 individuals on board perished. In an era gripped by the immense scale of global conflict, news was often carefully controlled. Due to wartime censorship, the Canal Creek air crash received scant attention from the press. The few articles that did surface primarily focused on the civilian passengers, the photographer, the YMCA representative, and the Salvation Army adjutant, mentioning only that they had tragically died in a plane accident with no hint of the devastating details. For many years, the memory of this wartime tragedy remained largely unknown to the local population. There was no marker, no formal acknowledgement of the lives lost. That changed through the determined efforts of John Milroy, a resident of Yeppoon. Starting around 2011, he tirelessly campaigned for a permanent memorial at the crash site. His dedication paid off when he secured approximately $14,000 in government funding. Finally, on June 16, 2012, a monument was unveiled, a poignant tribute to those who perished. TransAustralia Airlines Flight 538, 1960. Imagine a Friday night, back in 1960, June the 10th to be exact. A Fokker F-27, a workhorse of the skies owned by TransAustralia Airlines, was on its final leg to Mackay, Australia, after stops in Maryborough and Rockhampton. This wasn't a brand new bird. It had logged a respectable 2,420 hours in the air over 3,396 flights since its manufacture the year before. On board were 29 souls, all heading towards their destination. As the plane neared Rockhampton, the crew received word about some patchy ground fog at Mackay, a mere 20 feet high with about half a mile of visibility. They were even told to consider an alternate landing spot, so off they went again, with Townsville penciled in as a backup. About halfway there, everything seemed normal as they reported their position, expecting to land around 8:40 p.m., but Mackay Airport was closed. The pilot, a seasoned professional, decided to circle above at 13,000 feet, waiting for things to clear. The tower gave updates. The visibility was fluctuating, but the pilot could see the city lights and the surrounding area, except for a 10-mile stretch of fog creeping towards the airport. He requested landing clearance, got it for runway 14, and reported being on final approach. Then, just 50 feet above the ground, a small fog patch appeared out of nowhere, causing him to abort the landing. He decided to try the other runway, 32. He descended to 200 feet, but again, before crossing the threshold, he climbed back up, requesting to hold at 5,000 feet until the weather improved. For almost 20 minutes, they circled. Finally, around 10:02 p.m., the tower reported rapid improvement in visibility. The pilot responded, ready to descend for runway 32. They were cleared for a visual approach. The wind was calm and the altimeter setting was given. Then, silence. The aircraft, tragically, impacted the sea about 7.5 miles short of the runway. Australian National Airways Douglas DC-4, 1950. The story of the Douglas DC-4 Amana is one that still echoes in Australian aviation history, haunting its memory with unanswered questions and a sense of tragedy that lingers. On June 26, 1950, the Amana, an Australian National Airways flagship, took off from Perth on what was meant to be an 8-hour flight to Adelaide. Just 22 minutes later, the aircraft, carrying 24 passengers and a 5-person crew, met its tragic end. Witnesses described the final moments as surreal. The Amana was flying far too low, and its engine sputtered and backfired. Suddenly, the sounds went silent, followed by a piercing, high-pitched scream that would echo in the memories of those who heard it. The aftermath was devastating. The wreckage, consumed by fire, was scattered across a timbered landscape. Miraculously, one elderly passenger survived the initial crash. Found wandering amidst the burning debris, he clung to life for 6 days before succumbing to his injuries. The captain's body was found some distance from his seat, his shirt pulled over his head, suggesting a last-ditch attempt to protect himself from the searing heat. Despite his seatbelt being undone and suffering broken legs and a fractured skull, the captain's struggle for survival was painfully clear. An official investigation followed, but no clear answers emerged. Initial suspicions pointed to corrosion in the fuel system, possibly caused by water contamination, though this theory was eventually dismissed due to lack of solid evidence. However, an unofficial theory surfaced, involving a small, tipped-over fuel container found near the aircraft. The theory suggested that a fuel drain cock left open could have allowed air to enter the fuel line, leading to engine failure and, ultimately, the plane's destruction. Though dismissed as unlikely, this theory gained credibility after a simulation suggested it was plausible. Despite the years of investigation, the true cause of the Amana's demise remains shrouded in mystery.